Hello, my name is Jake Greenstein, sometimes known as the grumpy old writing coach. Not because I'm a grumpy person, though occasionally I suppose I am, but because writers make me so grumpy. Because I see the same problems over and over and over, and I would be so, I wouldn't call it simple, but those problems should never have occurred. Because we all fall into the same trap. We all make what I call the Great Misunderstanding. And to understand why I say that, you have to go back in time to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Back then, your skills were taught you by your mother, reading and writing, and the basic things like that. And as you can imagine, since there were no actual public schools, your spelling was mostly phonetic and whatever it was. Your math was whatever mom knew, whatever she needed to know, I suppose, if she went out and found out how. And that was perfectly good throughout all of history until the Industrial Revolution. Now, we have employers who need people who have writing and reading skills. Number one, reports. Number two, if you put a notice on the bulletin board and no one can read, what do you do? And math. If you don't know what an inch is, and you can't read a ruler, and you don't know simple math, how can you do tasks that involve measuring? The answer is that each industrial plant had a training school for the people who worked there, and they trained them in the basics. And this made no sense. You have to have a teacher, even though you may not be hiring anybody this week. You have to use space in the plant that could be producing product, doing something useful, and you have costs. So all of the manufacturers and the people who ran these various plants came to an agreement. They would pay a fair schooling tax, and the government would train people in a basic set of skills that they all needed. What we call today the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's how they pronounce it. And it solved another problem. You see, if mom goes to work and dad goes to work in the factory, who watches the kids? The school. So it provided more than just the basic 3 R's. And it still does. Think about what you did when it comes to writing through most of your school. Reports, essays, maybe letters, but every one of them was a nonfiction skill that your future employers would want you to have. How many employers want us to write poetry or fiction, except perhaps Hallmark or other greeting card companies? So we learned nonfiction, and the methodology for nonfiction is fact-based, author-centric. One person on stage talking to their audience, explaining and reporting. That's how history books are written. And when was the last time you bought a history book for some light reading? Problem with history books is that they are, it's happened already. There's no uncertainty. This happened, that happened, then that happened. As we read, there are things we haven't yet learned, but we don't have any feeling of uncertainty. That's why we can't use nonfiction techniques for fiction, because the goal of fiction is to entertain, not to inform. To make you care and to make you feel, not know. If I would ask 10 writers, not published, but 10 hopeful writers, these two questions, okay, I think they will all agree. Number one, why do we read? We read for the story. Everybody knows that, right? We love stories. Number two, the goal of writing is to make the reader know the story. And they would all, with very few exceptions, say, yes, that's true. But what I just said was a lie. We don't read for the story. We read for the adventure. We read to live the story, to be made to feel as if it's happening to us. Not having someone say, this happened, and that happened, then he did this, and she said that, and after that, oh, and let me explain to you why that matters. They don't want a narrator up on stage talking to them. They want to be placed into that little tiny slice of time that we call now. You and I, we wake up in the morning, and from the time we wake up until the time we go to sleep, our life is an unending chain of cause and effect. Okay? Something happens, we react to it. That probably determines what next we has our attention and what we next react to, and so on and so on and so on. How can our characters live in any other way? How can we? Well, let me give you an example. In a report, we break things down into discrete, this fact. Let's explain a little bit about the fact to amplify it, and then do more explaining if necessary until the fact is clear, and then go on to the next fact. So using that technique, we would say, John was in his house in the evening reading when he heard a noise in the hallway. It sounded metallic, and he thought that it might be or was a pistol cocking. Okay, John heard a noise. No, John didn't hear a noise. He heard a pistol cocking. He decided what it was. So, how do we present it in fiction? Instead, we say, metallic noise, like the sound of a pistol cocking, brought John's attention from the book. And he, now for 1 second, you wanted to know what he did. That's how fiction hooks you. We use not hearing and sight. We use all the senses. Basically, you say the sound of children at play in the playground, and bang, in your mind, that image of children screaming in the playground comes up. We use tricks like that. But we don't learn a damn one of them in school, where they teach us to write nonfiction. And that's the key. The thing we forget. The universities and the colleges offer programs, degree programs in fiction writing or commercial fiction writing or some variation on that. Would they offer them if what we learned in our schools was enough? I don't think so. It's getting dark. That's me. I work with the Boy Scouts, and that was fun. But that aside, would they offer courses in fiction writing if you learned what you needed to know in high school? Of course not. We have to assume that at least some of what they teach is necessary, and that's my point. You haven't learned any of the techniques that are necessary. Your writing is fact-based and author-centric. You, the author, talk to the reader and explain and report in a dispassionate, external observer voice. Why? Because the reader can't know how you would read it. You can't transcribe yourself telling the story to an audience, because when we tell a story, how we tell it, the emotion we put into it, the gestures, the body language, the eye contact, all of those things matter, because we're substituting for all the characters in a film. And so therefore, when we are on stage, our performance does it all. But how much of that performance makes to the page? Zero. Not a trace. You can't tell the reader how you spoke a line. Sure, you can say John laughed as he said, and we know John was laughing, but you can't say the narrator laughed as he talked about. So what the reader gets is a dispassionate external voice. And that's not fiction. Fiction is alive. Fiction places us into that moment of time called now. Fiction makes us care. It's written emotion-based and character-centric. So, while it's no harder to learn than the techniques that you learned in school, the techniques of fiction are necessary. My personal recommendation is Dwight Swain's Techniques of the Selling Writer. It's an old book. Wrote it back somewhere around 1960. And he talks about your typewriter and the importance of having a good typewriter ribbon when you mail your submission in. But that aside, the man was absolutely brilliant. And one of the reasons that I love it so much is that was the book. I had written 6 unsold, many times queried, tried my damnedest to sell them books. And I read that book, found that book, and a year later, I got my first yes from a publisher. And I wish you the same. And in the notes down below, I'm going to include the address of an archive website, because it's out of copyright protection right now, and you can read it online or download it. I would strongly suggest that you take a read of it, and read it slowly, with lots of time to say, yeah, I see what he's getting at, and this is how it would affect my writing. And time to practice it so that, well, like tying a knot. I can show you a square knot and have you tie it 3 times and you'll forget it tomorrow. But if you sit down and watch television for an hour, tying and untying, tying and untying, by the time you finish, you'll always remember it. Well, you have to do that with the techniques of fiction. Write with them. Edit your previous work and make it work. But be that as it may, I can tell you right now, once you master it, the act of writing becomes a lot more fun. Because rather than saying this happened and George will do this next and then that will happen, that doesn't work, because everyone will think with your mind and speak with your voice. But if you get into your protagonist's point of view, think as him, look at the situation as him or her, know exactly what they know, take into account what they do, their background, their training, their resources, and all of that sort of thing. That character, at some point, is going to say, me? Do that in this situation? Are you out of your mind? And they'll be right. Every time they will be right. And it is so much fun. I can tell you that once, when I was writing it's a kind of a psychological thing, where a psychologist is treating someone who, though he doesn't know it, has paranormal abilities. Okay, so the story is presented as a series of episodes where he is marrying. Well, he ended up marrying 6 wives, and they all died, and he was convinced that he was killing them. So, telling the stories of each of these wives, of one of them, he is supposed to be on a mountain road, and above him there's a cliff, and above that there is a woman who is a magazine writer who has been testing equipment out by going camping, who is being attacked by a bear, or at least chased by a bear. She falls off of the cliff and lands on top of his convertible top. That was the whole story. And she was going to be this very refined, very elegant person. And when he got out of the car after she landed on it and the convertible top broke her fall, he got out and she's stuck because her legs popped through the top. And he says, "Are you okay?" And she said, "I'm okay, but you better get out of here because here comes the explicative bear." And that's not exactly what I expected her to say. But that's what I typed, whether I liked it or not, because that was the way I, somehow or other, that's the way she wanted to react. She was nothing like what I expected. She was crude, she was profane, she was a lap dancer, and I fell in love with her. She was wonderful. She was adorable. And they stopped doing anything I wanted them to do, but I had no choice but to write down what they decided to do. And I was unable to stop writing because I was afraid that I would lose the thread if I stopped and came back. So I wrote for 32 hours straight, with a break only for bathroom and for the food my darling and understanding wife put in front of me with orders to eat, or she'll pull the plug on the computer. I love when that happened, and I wish it to you. So, the title of this was The Great Misunderstanding. We all suffer from it. So what I just told you has absolutely nothing to do with your talent or how well you write. But unless you're writing with the techniques that have been developed for fiction, it's going to read like a report. And it has to. So jump in. Jump in. Give it a try. Look up that book. Read a chapter or two. I think, first of all, if you're meant to write, you'll love it. If you're not, well, you've learned something really important and saved a lot of time wasted typing that's never going to go anywhere. So jump in. Give it a try. And whatever you do, keep on writing. See you next time.